Well, as I've been working in the last 2 times, I'm trying to establish better economics for the rural and small schools. There's a real disadvantage that rural schools have, and that's fundamentally because they have to pay for the transportation costs for the students getting to and from school, and that's vastly more expensive than it is in the city. For example, there are some districts in this state that pay $1,200 to get one kid back and forth to school in a year, and other schools in the cities will maybe pay $35. So that money comes out of the classroom money. And that's not right, because it defeats the whole idea of having the same amount of money going to each child in the state. The equity's not there. So we were trying to find solutions to that problem. And of course, there's always resistance to that because it could cause tax increases here or some problems someplace else. But we think we'll solve that. I have been and continue to try to prevent taxpayers from having to pay for abortions. Taxpayers who don't believe that that's the right thing to do shouldn't have to pay for somebody else's abortion. Fundamentally, what you do is you try to decrease the sourcing of funds to those companies that are involved in abortions for profit. Well, we maintain the same priorities, with education amounting to 52% of the budget, and Health and Human Services around 26%. But Health and Human Services is the fastest growing segment of our budget, so that will be hard to maintain. The amount that we're actually projected this year is $106.5 million more new revenue than last year. Last year, the estimate was $153 million. Okay, now as it turned out toward the end, after session, there was actually 22 more million came in, so it was $175 million, give or take, at the end. So we're looking at 106.5. If that estimate's anywhere close, we're looking at a severe reduction. I mean, we spent $135 million on education, K through 12 last year. That was 77% of the budget. All new money, 77% of the new money. We're talking about the total increase in new money being $106.5 million. So you know things can't be as good as last year. There's different ways of looking at it, but every particular department considers what they do the most important. So what the people really have hired us to do is to try to do the balancing act and to try to figure out how to divvy up this money, because if education is the most important, which is the way that we believe it is, those kids have got to be healthy, though. When they go to school, they won't learn anything. And if they aren't healthy, or if they are healthy but they ride a bus and the roads are dangerous, that's not good either. So you have to make sure there's enough for transportation. And then again, children can be endangered on the way, so the police force and judicial have got to be funded. So our job, what we're paid to do, is to do the balancing act. And you can look at the budget as it exists right now and realize that the percentages that are there are the sum total of aggregate of all of the previous legislatures and senates and governors. And so to deviate far from that would be, in terms of percentage, would be wrong unless there was some very unusual circumstance. And so I think that I would consider the wisdom in the council of the past with making decisions. Well, of course, education is very important. I have 8 young kids, and I still have 4 of them at home, plus a foreign exchange student to boot. But it's not going to do much good if we give all the money to education and there's nothing left for the other functions. For example, try to take things in perspective. Agriculture amounts to about 33% of the revenues and economy of this state. But as a state, we spend 0.57% on agriculture. Now think about that. I mean, that's something that we might regret in the future. There might be things that we could invest in agriculture that would make a difference in terms of the revenues. It doesn't take much of an increase in something so large to affect everything. So you're talking about $153 million last year, $106 million this year. Compared to the $7.6 billion budget, those are fairly small increases. And if we could make substantial changes in our revenue, it could have big impacts in all these areas. So to me, the most important thing is making sure that the engine that drives this thing is properly funded. Well, The issue with, I would raise taxes in a wartime or an emergency situation or something like that. However, when you look around at the different states around us, their taxes are either 0% for income tax or 6% or something less. In the state of Iowa, our corporate income tax is 12%, and that's the highest in the nation. The next highest to Iowa is Pennsylvania, 9.9%. So if you're a company and you're trying to make a profit and you're just over the line as Missouri or Nebraska or North Dakota or South Dakota, not too far away, you know, the choices are easily made, and a lot of good companies have left our state because of our taxes. So there's a situation where if you increase taxes, you can actually decrease revenue. And if I just make a little statement, if you can imagine in your mind a vertical axis that's total government revenue and horizontal axis that's tax rate, and the tax rate going from 0 to 100%, at 0% everybody knows the government gets nothing. And at 100%, most people say, well, they get everything, but free people don't work for nothing. So at 100% taxation, there's zero government revenue. So we know somewhere in between 0 and 100%, it peaks. And if you're beyond the peak, if you increase taxes, revenues drop. And you know, Kennedy decreased taxes and revenues went up. Reagan decreased taxes and revenues went up. And Bush the same, and so forth. We're on that side where if you actually increase taxes, the revenues are likely to go down. What we would like to have in this state is a thriving economy that supports many people moving into it, which would then support the children required for the school systems. And to increase the taxes, if it drives companies out, it's counterproductive. Decreasing tax rates doesn't instantaneously raise the income, but it does over time. So the whole thing requires a very judicious choice of how you decrease the tax rate. You don't do it immediately. You do it gradually so that people and businesses can adjust. But they need to know what the plan is. Well, we already have a shortage of state troopers. So I don't think we ought to get rid of the protection for our citizens and our children. So there's some things I think we don't go below, all right? I think that if there was, let's say, a 10% or a 2% reduction in the income, the first thing you should do is look and see, well, what would that mean if that were spread equally over everything? And if something is sore, like, for example, whether or not you have enough police protection, that you would hold firm and you'd try to distribute the rest so that it's not too painful for everything else. It's a balancing act. It's hard to say it any other way. There's no one part of government that's more important than the other. Like I said, those kids can't get an education if they're sick or the roads aren't working or if the police can't protect them. It all needs to work. I think that we're in a situation right now where the economy has slowed to the point, and we've done enough stripping of the surplus, if you will. I doubt that the departments that had their budgets decreased considered that surplus, but there's a number of departments that don't have the money that they used to have. And so to answer your question, I don't see pulling money out of one place to put it in another place because there's not a whole lot of money in any of the places, because all the other places that you're talking about have percentages that are like 0.57%. If you took it all and put it into education, what would that do to 52%? It wouldn't do anything for it. Well, I was there when we voted for it. It was about 4:30 in the morning, as I recall. We voted for medical marijuana to be used for children that had hundreds of epileptic fits during the day, and their lives were really being put in danger by the medications that they were taking. So what we did was we established that we were not going to arrest people who had the following: a fixed amount, and offhand I can't remember exactly how many grams, but a fixed amount of capsules that had 3% or less of the cannabinoid, and that didn't provide transportation for anybody to bring it into the state. We didn't grow it, but we would not arrest anyone that had the possession as long as the people were registered to have it, and they had the amount that we said they could have, and it was the percentage that we said that was okay. That worked then. Okay. Now what we hear is that there are more diseases that requires this. The real problem is with the federal government making marijuana a Schedule I drug. Opium and morphine, Schedule II. Doctors can work with opium and morphine, but doctors cannot legally, according to the Drug Enforcement Agency, work with medical marijuana because it's Schedule I. So why the federal government doesn't get off the pot and do their job and make it Schedule II so doctors could deal with this like any other drug is beyond me. That's where the real solution is. The best thing we can do as a state is say, for these kind of medicines, we won't arrest, all right? But we don't want to be like Colorado. We don't want to be like California. If we're going to be anything, it'd be more like New Mexico. New Mexico has a more controlled system. We are for taking care of people medically, but we're even more for having the federal government do the job they're supposed to do. I don't approve of that, even though Washington, D.C. has legalized it, and Colorado, and we have dogs getting sick on marijuana cookies and kids and all. That's not the kind of thing that I think Iowa really needs. And why not heroin after that, or why not, you name it. Meth, let's make meth legal. After all, it's cheap. It's harmful, and so no. Yeah, there's an effort in the state among different counties to have their own minimum wage. And the Office of Budgets, Congressional Office of Budgets, in 2014, when Harkin was trying to get a 10.10 dollars per hour, they went and did some work to find out the number of people that would be unemployed because of that. The issue really is that the minimum wage is there to require employers to pay people who have very few skills something that they wouldn't otherwise pay because the market doesn't bear it. And then if you raise it, what ends up happening is that those people who have the least qualifications are the ones that are let go. The ones that have the more qualifications, the pay is reasonable for the qualification. So there will be a downside to raising the minimum wage. And the downside will be people will be laid off. And the worst downside is what McDonald's is trying to do to replace their minimum wage workers with robots. Because when labor gets too expensive, business tries to find a substitution with capital of labor. That's right out of any economics book. And so we don't want that to happen. And when I was asked about 10-10, why not 10-10? I said, well, why not 40-40? The answer is the same. It's too expensive for the application. So the Office of Management and Budget, I guess, the exact title I'm not sure of, but I could read it there for you. They came up and they said that if we went to 10.10 for the minimum wage, across the country there would be 500,000 jobs lost. And Iowa's population is just shy of 1%. It's 0.909% of the population. And that translates into 4,545 jobs lost in the state of Iowa by increasing the minimum wage. Now that number is the number of people who will lose, all right? Now sure, there'll be a good number of people whose salary will have gone up, but the purpose of the minimum wage is to protect the people who are barely employable. Those that have the least skill, and those that have the very least skills are the ones that are going to fall off. And they'll end up in a safety net, and they'll be, instead of employed, they'll be in the welfare system. You just don't, even though it sounds good, everyone's, oh yeah, they should pay more. What you're doing is you're changing the situation for the economy, and the government's not paying them. There's the private owners are paying them, and the effect is some people are just going to be too expensive for the market, too expensive, and that's not what we want to do.